Naomi Greer's stomach had been empty since yesterday. Rain hammered South Memphis. She gripped a styrofoam box fried chicken rice gravy, the only meal she had all day. Then she saw Graham Sinclair, slumped on the curb, soaked, shaking, like the world already forgot him. Every part of her screamed, "Keep walking. You haven't eaten. Solomon's waiting." Her feet moved before her head caught up. She set the box in his hands.
You need this more than I do.
He looked up, eyes sharp, clear, didn't match the rest of him.
I can't take your food.
You're not taking it. I'm giving it.
He opened the lid, ate slowly at first, then, like someone who forgot what warm food tasted like. She sat beside him in the rain and said nothing. She gave away her last meal, not knowing his name, what kind of man he was, or how her life was about to change. Once that rainy night passed, she'd find out everything. Have you ever given something to a stranger, knowing you couldn't afford to, and done it anyway because walking away felt worse? If you have, drop a like and tell me your story in the comments, because you're about to meet someone who did exactly that. Let me tell you how it all began. But to understand why Naomi gave away her only meal that night, you need to understand the life she was already living, and how close she was to the edge. Naomi Greer woke up every morning at 4:45, no alarm, her body just knew. The house was small, peeling walls, a kitchen counter buried under past-due bills, held down by a chipped coffee mug, her mother's. The faucet dripped, the radiator clanged all night. The kind of place most people would call run down, but for Naomi, it was everything, because it sat in the one school district where her little brother Solomon was finally starting to do okay. Solomon was 11. Their mom died 2 years ago, complications from lupus. Their dad left when Solomon was still in diapers. At 24, Naomi walked into a courtroom and fought for custody. She was terrified the judge would look at her bank account, look at her age, and say, no. He didn't. But the weight of that responsibility hadn't gotten lighter since. If anything, it got heavier every month. The bills piled up. Every morning, same routine. She'd make Solomon 2 slices of bread with peanut butter, pour the last of the cereal into his bowl, pack his lunch bag. Then she'd stand at the counter, drink tap water, and call it breakfast. Some mornings, her hands shook a little from not eating. She'd grip the edge of the counter until it passed. Solomon never saw. She made sure of that. She wasn't afraid of being hungry. She was afraid of the day she couldn't keep the lights on, the day someone knocked on the door and told her Solomon had to go somewhere else. That fear sat in her chest like a rock. First thing in the morning, last thing at night, it never left. She just learned how to breathe around it. She had 2 jobs. First shift at the hospital laundry, 5:30 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon. Folding sheets, sorting gowns, 8 hours on her feet in a room that smelled like bleach. Her hands were always dry and cracked from the detergent. A coworker once told her, "Nobody cares how you fold a hospital gown." Naomi smiled and said, "The person wearing it might." That was Naomi. She noticed things other people didn't bother noticing. On the bus to work, she'd give up her seat for Mrs. Dorothy Moore, an elderly neighbor with a bad hip, stood for 35 minutes every time, never complained, never mentioned it. Between shifts, she'd pick Solomon up from school, walk him home, check his homework, ask about his day, not in a rush but like it mattered, because to her it did. Sometimes they'd sit on the front steps together, and she'd quiz him on vocabulary words. He was getting better at spelling, worse at math. She was the opposite. They made a good team. Then she'd head to her second job, evening shift at a small soul food diner owned by Clyde Patterson, a 62-year-old man who was gruff with everyone, but soft with Naomi, even though he'd never admit it. She waited tables from 4 to 10, remembered every regular's name, remembered their orders, remembered their kids' birthdays. One time, a family of 4 left a $2 tip on a $45 check. She pocketed it without changing her expression, smiled at the next table like nothing happened. She kept a small notebook in her apron pocket. Every night before bed, she'd write one good thing that happened that day. Just one. Tonight's entry. Solomon got a B+ on his science test. That notebook was almost full, not because life was good, but because Naomi refused to stop looking for the parts that were. Now here's the part that matters. Naomi owed about $4,800 in back rent. She'd been behind for months. The landlord could have kicked her out, almost did, but they worked out a deal. $500 a month paid on time, no exceptions. Miss one payment, the deal's off, and she's out. She had $340 in her bank account. The payment was due in 3 days. She was $160 short and counting on picking up an extra shift or getting a small advance from Clyde to close the gap. It wasn't much, but it was the difference between keeping the roof and losing it. $340. That's what stood between Naomi and Solomon keeping their home and Naomi and Solomon on the street. She wouldn't borrow from Mrs. Dorothy Moore, the elderly neighbor who'd offered twice. "You need that money more than I do, Miss Dorothy," Naomi told her, and that was the end of it. On her walk to the diner that evening, Naomi passed a construction billboard on an empty lot 2 blocks from her house. Big letters, "Future home of the Sinclair Community Wellness Center, Sinclair Enterprises." She didn't look twice. Just another sign promising change in a neighborhood that never changed. She had no idea that name would mean anything to her. Not yet. But what Naomi didn't know, what nobody on that block knew, was that the man behind that billboard, the man whose name was printed 10 feet tall on that sign, was about to end up sitting on a wet curb 6 blocks away, shivering, hungry, and completely alone. And Naomi was about to give him her last meal. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday night shift, but nothing about that night was going to be normal. Naomi got to the diner at 4, tied her apron, put on her work smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes but fooled most customers. She started with table 6, refilled waters, cleared plates, same routine she could do with her eyes closed. But 10 minutes in, Clyde pulled her aside. He had that look, the one where he rubbed the back of his neck and couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Business is down," he said. "I gotta cut you back. 4 shifts a week starting next Monday. I'm sorry, Naomi." He looked away when he said it, like the words tasted bad in his mouth. Naomi didn't blink. She didn't argue. She just nodded and said, "Okay, Mr. Clyde." But inside, the math was already running. 4 shifts instead of 6. That's roughly $180 less a month. $180 she didn't have. The rent gap just got wider. The ground under her feet just got thinner. She went back to work, smiled at table 3, took the order at table 9, brought extra napkins to the family by the window without being asked. She moved through the diner like nothing had changed. Because that's what Naomi did. She kept moving. Even when the floor was falling out from under her, a couple with a little girl left a $2 tip on a $45 check. Naomi looked at the 2 crumpled bills on the table, put them in her apron pocket, and moved on. No expression, no pause, just the next table. Around 8:30, the sky opened up. Not a drizzle, not a passing shower, a full-blown Memphis thunderstorm. Rain hammered the windows so hard it sounded like gravel. Lightning flashed white across the dining room. The lights flickered twice. Thunder rattled the windows. Customers started leaving. One by one, then all at once. By 8:45, the diner was empty, except for Naomi and Clyde. He wiped down the counter and looked at her. "Go on home. Nothing else coming in tonight." She untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the kitchen door. Then Clyde did something he didn't do often. He packed up a styrofoam container from the leftover special, smothered fried chicken, rice collard greens, and held it out to her. "Take this home," he said, then quieter, like he didn't want her to hear, but needed to say it anyway. "You look thin, girl. Eat something." Naomi took the container. The warmth bled through the bottom into her palms. It smelled like something her mother used to make. She hadn't had anything since a handful of crackers around 11 that morning. Her stomach pulled tight. She stepped outside. The rain hit her like a wall. Her umbrella was broken, had been for weeks. She pulled a plastic bag over her head and walked to the bus stop. Got on, rode 6 stops, got off. The street was empty, gutters running full, streetlights turning the puddles orange, and that's when she saw him. A man, sitting on the curb about 30 feet ahead of her, soaked through, coat too big for him, wrinkled, filthy, head between his knees. Not holding a sign, not asking for change, just sitting in the rain like he had nowhere else to be and no reason to get up. But something about him was off. Naomi noticed it the way she noticed everything quietly, almost without thinking. His back. Even hunched over in the rain, his spine was straight. Not the posture of someone who'd been sleeping on sidewalks. His hands were trembling, but his nails were clean. Trimmed. His shoes were muddy, but the stitching looked like it cost more than her rent. Small things. The kind of details that didn't add up. She filed it under strange and kept walking. She had bigger problems tonight. Her stomach growled, loud this time. She looked down at the container in her hands. Warm, heavy, the best meal she was going to have all week. Then she looked at the man. He was staring at the container too, not begging, not reaching for it, just looking the way someone looks at something they want but are too ashamed to ask for. Then he turned his face away, like he was embarrassed by his own hunger. Something tightened in Naomi's chest, something she couldn't walk past. She thought about Solomon waiting at home, thought about the $340, thought about every reason she had to keep moving. Then she thought about her mother. About all those nights her mother cooked for the whole house and ate last, sometimes didn't eat at all. What happened next took less than a minute, but it was the kind of minute that splits a life into before and after. Naomi walked over. She didn't say anything grand, didn't make a speech. She just crouched down in front of him, rain running down her face, and held out the styrofoam container. "You need this more than I do." The man looked up, and for a second Naomi almost pulled back because his eyes didn't belong on that face. They were sharp, clear, red-rimmed from exhaustion but focused in a way that didn't match the rest of him. Like someone used to being in control who'd just lost all of it. He shook his head slowly. "I can't take your food." His voice was low, hoarse, but there was something careful in the way he spoke, precise, deliberate, not the voice of someone who'd been on the streets for long. Naomi didn't have the energy to think about that right now. She pushed the container closer. "You're not taking it. I'm giving it." He took it. His hands were shaking so badly the container almost slipped. Naomi reached out and steadied it, her fingers brushing against his for just a second. His skin was burning hot. He opened the lid. Steam rose between them. He closed his eyes and breathed it in like he was trying to memorize the smell. For a moment, neither of them said a word. Just rain, just breathing, just two people on a sidewalk at the end of a long day. Then he ate. Slowly at first, like he was trying to remember how, then faster, hungrier, like something inside him broke open and the food was the first real thing he'd felt in weeks. Naomi sat down on the wet sidewalk beside him, rain soaking through her jeans, cold biting through her shirt. She didn't watch him eat. She looked straight ahead, staring at nothing, giving him the only thing she had left to give after the food. His dignity. When he was done, he sat still for a long time, then quietly, "Thank you." Naomi didn't say, "You're welcome." She just reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the last tissue she had, handed it to him. Didn't look at him, didn't make it a thing. He took it, stared at it for a second, like no one had handed him something small and kind in a very long time. That's when she heard it. A wheeze, deep in his chest, then another one. His breathing was wrong, shallow, rattling, like air was getting caught somewhere it shouldn't be. She turned and looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since she sat down. His face was flushed, lips dry and cracked. She pressed the back of her hand against his forehead, the way her mother used to do with Solomon. He was burning up. "You're sick," she said, not a question. He didn't answer, just closed his eyes. His body swayed slightly, like even sitting up was costing him everything he had left. His breathing sounded worse by the second, wet, heavy, like his lungs were filling with something that shouldn't be there. Naomi pulled out her phone. Cracked screen, 8% battery. She could call 911, but she knew how that would go. They'd come, they'd see a man who looked homeless, soaked and shaking on a sidewalk in South Memphis, and the response wouldn't be fast. She'd seen it before. She'd lived in this neighborhood her whole life. She knew what got priority and what didn't. So she didn't call. She looked around, nobody on the street, no one coming, just her and this man and the rain. She grabbed his arm, pulled it over her shoulder, and started walking. 4 blocks, in the rain, in the dark, half carrying a man who was taller and heavier than her, who could barely keep his feet under him. Every few steps he stumbled and she had to plant her feet and hold him up, her shoes filled with water, her legs burned, her empty stomach cramped so hard she almost doubled over. She bit the inside of her cheek and kept going. 1 block, 2, 3, the clinic lights flickered up ahead through the rain like something she wasn't sure was real. The urgent care clinic on the corner, open 24 hours. She pushed through the glass door, water dripping off both of them onto the tile floor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and stale coffee. The intake nurse looked up from behind the counter, looked at the man, looked at Naomi. Does he have insurance? Graham thought. Naomi still didn't know his name, had nothing. No ID, no wallet, no phone, nothing. The nurse looked at Naomi, waiting. And this is where the story turns. $340, that's what Naomi had in her account. That's what she'd been scraping together for the rent payment due in 3 days. $500 was the deal with her landlord, $340 was close. She was planning to ask Clyde for an advance to cover the gap. It wasn't a sure thing, but it was a plan. A thread. The only thread keeping her and Solomon in that house, in that school district, in the life she'd built from nothing. If she paid this man's medical bill, that thread would snap. She stood at that counter with her debit card in her hand and her whole world on a scale. On one side, Solomon, the house, the school, everything she'd fought for since the day she walked into that courtroom at 24 years old. On the other side, a stranger, a man she'd known for 20 minutes, a man who might not remember her face tomorrow. Her hand hovered over the counter. She could feel the nurse watching her, could hear the rain hammering the windows behind her, could feel her stomach empty, tight, twisting. She thought about walking away. For a split second, she almost did. Her fingers started to pull back. Then she heard her mother's voice, not a memory she chose, one that chose her. Clear as day, like her mother was standing right there in that fluorescent waiting room. When you see someone hurting worse than you help. Even if all you got is your last plate of food, you help. Because the day you stop doing that is the day you lose who you are. Naomi put the card on the counter. "I'll pay," she said. She didn't look at the receipt, didn't check the balance, just signed and stepped back. The card went through. She didn't know what the balance said after, didn't want to know. She just knew that the number left in that account wasn't going to be enough for rent, wasn't going to be enough for much of anything. She had just traded her home for a stranger. That clinic visit ran back. IV fluids, antibiotics. The doctor said it was severe dehydration and early-stage pneumonia. Another night out in that rain, and it could have been worse. A lot worse. Naomi didn't leave. She sat in a hard plastic chair in the waiting room for 2 hours, filling out his intake paperwork because he said he didn't have his ID on him. She wrote Graham under first name, left the last name blank. He didn't correct her. She didn't push. She sat there with her wet clothes sticking to the chair, her stomach hollow, her phone dead, and she waited. Not because she had to, not because anyone asked her to, because walking out while he was still hooked up to an IV didn't feel right. And Naomi did what felt right, even when it cost her. When the doctor finally came out and said he could go, it was almost midnight. Graham walked out of the back room slowly. He looked a little better color coming back, breathing steadier, but still weak, still unsteady on his feet. He had a prescription in his hand that he folded and put in his coat pocket without looking at it. Naomi stood up. "There's a shelter 2 blocks from here, New Hope Mission. They take walk-ins until midnight. If we go now, you'll make it." He looked at her. That same look from the sidewalk, the one that didn't match, like he was studying her. Trying to figure something out. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know." She walked him there. Side by side this time, he could stand on his own now mostly. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. The streets were quiet. Their footsteps echoed off the wet pavement. At the door of the shelter, Naomi spoke to the staff inside, told them he needed a bed for the night, told them he'd just come from urgent care. She waited until they checked him in, until she saw him walk through the second door, until she was sure he was inside and not coming back out into the cold. Then she turned to leave. "Wait." She stopped, looked back. Graham was standing just inside the doorway. The light from the hallway behind him made his face hard to read, but his voice was clear. "Why did you do all this?" Naomi didn't think about the answer. It came out the way true things do without effort. "My mom. She didn't have much either, but anytime someone in the neighborhood was going through something, didn't matter what, she'd find a way to help. Bring food over, watch their kids, drive them to the clinic, whatever she could do." Naomi paused. "I grew up watching her do that, so I just do it too. I don't really think about it." Graham didn't say anything for a long time. He just stood there looking at her, and something shifted behind his eyes. Something cracked open, like her answer had hit a nerve she didn't know was there. Then his gaze dropped, just for a second, to her shirt. The diner logo printed across the chest. Clyde's Kitchen, South Memphis. He looked at it long enough to read it, long enough to remember it. Naomi didn't notice. "Take care of yourself," she said, and she walked away. She didn't look back. Didn't see Graham still standing in that doorway, watching the back of her head until she turned the corner. Didn't see him reach into his coat pocket past the prescription and pull out a phone. Not the kind of phone a homeless man carries. Slim, new, expensive. She didn't see him dial a number, didn't hear what he said. But if she had everything about that night, would have made a lot more sense. She just walked home, alone, in the drizzle, with an empty stomach and an emptier bank account, and a feeling she couldn't name sitting heavy in her chest. The next day, something happened that Clyde Patterson had never seen before in 30 years of running that diner. It was a little after 3 in the afternoon. Naomi wasn't in yet, her shift didn't start until 4. The lunch crowd had cleared out. Clyde was wiping down the counter, same as always, when the front door opened. A man walked in, not the kind of man who usually walked into Clyde's kitchen. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, white shirt collar open, clean-shaven, hair combed back. Next to the curb outside, a black car idled, the kind with tinted windows and leather seats you could smell from across the street. The man looked around the diner, took in the cracked vinyl booths, the faded menu board, the ceiling fan wobbling on its axis, Then he walked straight to the counter. "I'm looking for a woman who works here," he said. "She was wearing one of your uniforms last night. I need her address." Clyde put the rag down, looked at the man, looked at the car outside, looked back at the man. "I don't give out my employees' information," he said, flat, final. The man didn't push. He just stood there for a moment. Then he said quietly, "She paid my medical bill last night. I was sick. She didn't know me. She walked me to a clinic in the rain and put her card down. I don't think she could afford it." Clyde's hand stopped on the counter. He stared at the man for a long time. The suit, the car, the expensive watch on his wrist. Then he thought about Naomi, about how thin she'd looked lately, about the container of food he'd packed for her, about the way she always said, "I'm fine," when she clearly wasn't. He pulled a napkin from the dispenser, wrote an address on it, slid it across the counter without a word. The man picked it up, nodded once, walked out. Clyde watched through the window as the black car pulled away from the curb and turned south toward Naomi's street. He didn't know who that man was, but something about the look in his eyes told Clyde this wasn't someone coming to cause trouble. It was someone who owed a debt he didn't know how to repay. What Clyde didn't know, what Naomi didn't know, what nobody in that diner or on that block or in that whole neighborhood knew, was that the man in the suit was the same man who'd been shivering on a sidewalk the night before. And his name wasn't just Graham. It was Graham Sinclair, as in Sinclair Enterprises, as in the name on that billboard 2 blocks from Naomi's house, as in a $4 billion real estate empire, and he was on his way to her front door. But here's the part that changes everything. Naomi was home. It was a little before 4. She was getting ready for her shift, lacing up her shoes, when there was a knock at the door. She wasn't expecting anyone. Solomon was at school. Miss Dorothy usually came by on weekends. Nobody else knocked on that door. She opened it, and the ground shifted under her feet. Standing on her porch was the man from last night, the man from the sidewalk, the man she'd fed in the rain, carried to a clinic and paid for with money she didn't have. Except he didn't look anything like he did 12 hours ago. He was wearing a charcoal suit, clean-shaven, hair combed back, standing straight, fully straight, not hunched, not shivering. And behind him, parked on her narrow street between a rusted pickup and a chain-link fence, was a black car that probably cost more than every house on the block combined. Naomi didn't move. She just stood in the doorway, one shoe on, one shoe off, staring. "Graham," she said. "My name is Graham Sinclair," he said. "I own Sinclair Enterprises. We're a real estate development company. I need to tell you the truth about last night." Naomi didn't say anything. She just looked at him, then at the car, then back at him. Her brain was trying to match the man in front of her with the man who'd been shaking on a curb in the rain. It wouldn't click. He didn't wait for an invitation. He just started talking. And what he said changed everything. 6 months ago, Graham was at the top of the world. $4 billion company, properties in 12 states, magazine covers, board meetings, the kind of life most people dream about. And a woman he loved, loved enough to buy a ring, loved enough to give her a supplementary card, let her into his accounts, let her in closer than anyone. Then he found out. Not all at once. It started with small things, transactions he didn't recognize, restaurant charges in cities she said she hadn't visited, cash withdrawals that didn't line up. He pulled the statements, months of them, and the picture that formed made his stomach turn. Hundreds of thousands of dollars siphoned off through dozens of small transactions over nearly a year, all through the card he'd given her because he trusted her. When he confronted her, she didn't deny it, didn't cry, didn't explain. She just stood in the hallway of his penthouse, looked at him and said, "Without the money, there's no reason to stay." Then she picked up her suitcase, already packed, and walked out. Graham stood in that hallway for a long time after the door closed. And something inside him broke. Not his heart, something deeper. His ability to trust. To believe that anyone around him, partners, friends, employees, anyone saw him as anything other than a balance sheet. He stopped sleeping, started having panic attacks. Sat alone in a penthouse with a dining table that seated 14 and not a single person to call. Everyone in his life was on a payroll. Everyone had a reason to smile at him that had nothing to do with who he was. So he did something most people would call crazy. He decided to find out what would happen if he had nothing. If the suit was gone, the watch was gone, the car was gone, if he was just a man on a sidewalk with no name and no wallet, would anyone stop? He told his bodyguard not to follow, dressed in old clothes he bought from a thrift store, left his ID at home, and walked into different neighborhoods in different cities just to see. Just to sit on a corner and find out if anyone in this world would look at him when he had nothing to offer. Atlanta. Nobody stopped. Chicago. A security guard told him to move. Houston. A woman pulled her child closer and crossed the street. Memphis was supposed to be the last one, but that night something went wrong. Walking through South Memphis after dark, two men came up behind him. One grabbed his coat, the other took his wallet and phone, gone in 30 seconds. No violence, just fast hands and faster feet disappearing into an alley. And just like that, the experiment became real. He wasn't pretending anymore. He had no money, no phone, no way to call his bodyguard, who was waiting at a hotel 15 miles away and had no idea where Graham was. The rain started, then the fever. He'd been walking too long, hadn't eaten, hadn't slept properly in weeks. His body gave out. He sat down on a curb on a street he didn't know the name of. And he stayed there, for 4 hours, watching people walk by, watching headlights sweep past. Nobody stopped, nobody looked. Until Naomi. Graham paused. He was still standing on her porch. Naomi was still in the doorway. She hadn't said a word. "I've sat on sidewalks in 6 cities," he said, "and you're the only person who stopped. But that's not why I'm here." He looked at her. "It's not just that you gave me your food, it's that you turned your face away while I ate so I wouldn't feel ashamed. It's that you handed me a tissue without me asking. It's the way you talked about your mother, like helping people wasn't some big heroic thing, just something you do. Like breathing." He paused again. His voice dropped. "I've spent 6 months looking for one person who would see me, really see me when I had nothing. And I found her. She was working 2 jobs, 3 days from losing her house, and she gave a stranger everything she had." Naomi's hand tightened on the doorframe. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't blink. She didn't say anything yet. But she was listening. And Graham wasn't done. Graham didn't come to Naomi's door just to tell his story. He came because something happened on that sidewalk that he couldn't walk away from. And he wasn't talking about the food. But Naomi didn't fall into his arms. She didn't cry. She didn't say thank you or oh my God or any of the things you might expect. She stood in that doorway for a long time. Then she said, "So I was a test." Graham shook his head. "You were supposed to be, but you turned out to be the answer." Naomi looked at him, looked at the car, looked at her own house, the peeling paint, the crooked mailbox, the stack of past due notices she could see through the screen door. "I don't need saving," she said. "I know," he said. "I do." And that was it. That was the moment. Not a grand gesture, not a check, not a promise. Just a man standing on a porch telling a woman she'd already done the one thing nobody else could. She'd seen him when he was invisible. He left that day, didn't push, didn't linger, just got in the car and drove away. Naomi went to work, served tables, came home, made Solomon dinner, went to bed. But the next day, Graham came back. He showed up at Clyde's kitchen, not in a suit this time, just jeans and a plain shirt. He sat in a corner booth, ordered coffee, and waited. When Naomi had a free minute between tables, he talked to her, not about money, not about business, about her, about Solomon, about Clyde's smothered chicken recipe, and whether collard greens were better with vinegar or without. She was guarded, stiff, polite, but distant. She'd spent her whole life learning that people who showed up with promises usually disappeared with excuses. A man like Graham, a billionaire sitting in a corner booth of a diner in South Memphis that had an expiration date written all over it. But he came back the next day, and the day after that. He picked Solomon up from school one afternoon when Naomi got stuck on a double shift. Solomon came home talking about how the guy in the nice car helped him with his math homework and actually made it make sense. Naomi listened to Solomon talk and said nothing, but something loosened in her chest that night, just a little. He fixed the faucet in Naomi's kitchen, the one that had been dripping for 2 years. He didn't call a plumber. He went to the hardware store, bought a washer for 60 cents, and did it himself. His hands were clumsy with the wrench, clearly not something he did often, but he stayed under that sink until the dripping stopped. He didn't send gifts, didn't wire money, didn't show up with grand gestures or photographers or anything that smelled like charity. He just showed up. Day after day, week after week, like clockwork, like it mattered, because to him it did. Naomi watched him, the way she watched everything carefully, quietly waiting for the mask to slip, waiting for the moment he got bored or impatient or reminded of how different their worlds were. That moment never came. Somewhere around the 3rd month, she stopped waiting for him to leave. Somewhere around the 4th, she realized she looked forward to seeing him at that corner booth. By the 5th, Solomon was calling him by his first name and saving him a seat at the kitchen table. She never said, "I love you" first. She didn't have to. It showed up in small things. The way she poured his coffee without asking, the way she let him walk her to the bus stop, the way she stopped flinching when he reached for her hand. 6 months after that rainy night, they got married. It was small, simple, at a courthouse, then dinner at Clyde's kitchen with Solomon, Miss Dorothy, and a handful of neighbors who'd watched Naomi grow up. Clyde made the food himself. He didn't charge them. He also didn't cry, but his eyes were red when he gave the toast. A year later, they had their first child. Naomi's life was different now. She didn't count every dollar anymore, didn't skip meals, didn't lie awake calculating how many shifts stood between Solomon and the street. But she didn't forget. She never forgot what hunger felt like, what fear tasted like at 4 a.m, what it meant to sit across from your little brother and smile while your own stomach screamed. And that's where the story could have ended. Girl meets billionaire, billionaire falls in love, happy ending, credits roll. But Naomi Greer wasn't built for a fairy tale ending. She was built for something bigger. Remember that billboard? The one on the empty lot 2 blocks from her old house, future home of the Sinclair Community Wellness Center? The sign she walked past every day without looking twice? That lot was still empty. And Naomi had an idea. She sat down with Graham one evening after Solomon was asleep and told him what she wanted to build. Not a wellness center, not a corporate project with his name on it. A kitchen. A community kitchen, right there on that empty lot. A place where anyone could walk in and get a hot meal, no questions asked, no forms to fill out, no plastic trays, real plates, real silverware, real food, the kind of meal that says, "You matter," without anyone having to say it out loud. And she wanted to run it herself. Graham looked at her across the table, and for the first time since she'd known him, he smiled like he had nothing to prove. "Tell me what you need," he said. She did. And that's when everything really started. Within 6 months, the empty lot on Naomi Street didn't look empty anymore, and neither did Naomi. The construction went fast. Naomi was on site every single day, not in a hard hat behind a desk, but in jeans and work boots, walking the floor with architects, tasting test recipes in a borrowed commercial kitchen across and work boots, walking the floor with architects, tasting test recipes in a borrowed commercial kitchen across town, going over the layout until the placement of every table felt right. She hired from the neighborhood, not from resumes, from life. 3 single mothers from her old apartment complex, women she'd seen carrying grocery bags up 4 flights of stairs with babies on their hips. A line cook named Terrell, who just finished a re-entry program after 5 years inside and couldn't get anyone to give him a shot. 2 teenagers from the community center who wanted to learn to cook but couldn't afford culinary school. And Clyde. She asked him to come on as a paid consultant. His recipes formed the backbone of the menu-smothered chicken, collard greens, cornbread, sweet potato pie. The same food he'd been making for 30 years in a diner most people outside South Memphis didn't know existed. Clyde walked through the new kitchen on the first day it was finished. Stainless steel counters, industrial ovens, walk-in cooler. He ran his hand along the counter slowly and just stood there for a while. "This is nicer than anything I ever had," he said quietly. Naomi smiled. "Mama would have said I'm folding the napkins wrong." They both laughed. First real laugh she'd had in a long time. Opening day was a Tuesday. Naomi chose that on purpose. Tuesdays were the day she'd met Graham on the sidewalk. It felt right. The community kitchen ran on a dual model. One side was a paying restaurant, affordable soul food, priced for the neighborhood. The other side was a free meal program. No questions, no paperwork, no ID required. You walk in, you sit down, you eat on real plates with real silverware. No cafeteria trays, no plastic forks, because Naomi believed that how you serve a meal tells a person how much they're worth. Word spread. The local news picked it up first. A reporter from the Memphis ABC affiliate ran a segment, then a regional outlet, then national. The story traveled the way good stories do. Not because of marketing, but because people couldn't stop sharing it. But Naomi didn't do interviews. She didn't stand in front of cameras. She let the food talk. Within 3 months, the kitchen was serving hundreds of free meals every week. The paying side covered most of the operating costs. What it didn't cover, Sinclair Enterprises handled. She opened cooking classes for teenagers on Saturday mornings. Free. First come, first served. The waiting list filled up in 2 days. Solomon volunteered on weekends. He ran the drink station. He'd gotten taller, smiled more, started calling the kitchen our place. The model worked. Better than anyone expected. So they expanded. Graham funded 2 more community kitchens, one in Atlanta, one in Chicago. But he didn't put executives in charge. He found local people. People from the neighborhood, people who understood what it felt like to be hungry and invisible. Naomi's rule, trust the people who live there to know what's needed. Miss Dorothy Moore, the neighbor with the bad hip, the one Naomi used to give her bus seat to, now ate dinner at the kitchen every Thursday. Naomi reserved a corner table for her with a small, handwritten sign, Miss Dorothy's Table. Nobody else sat there on Thursdays. Nobody ever had to be told. And Graham, every Tuesday evening, he was there. Not at the head of a conference table, not signing checks. He was in the back, sleeves rolled up, washing dishes. The same hands that signed deals worth millions were soaking in soapy water, scrubbing pots and stacking plates. The kitchen staff didn't call him Mr. Sinclair, they called him Graham, sometimes just G. He never corrected them. Naomi's eviction notice, the one from months ago, the one that almost ended everything, was framed on the wall of her office in the kitchen. Below it, a sticky note in her handwriting, 3 days, that's how close it was. She looked at it every single morning before the doors opened, not to feel grateful, not to feel proud, just to remember. Because the day she forgot where she came from would be the day she stopped understanding the people walking through that door. 1 year after that rainy night, it happened again. Tuesday. Rain since late afternoon, steady, heavy, the kind that keeps people indoors and empties the streets. The kitchen was about to close. Most of the staff had gone home. Naomi was wiping down the last tables. Graham was in the back finishing the dishes. The front door opened. A young woman stepped inside, maybe 19, soaked, thin. A toddler on her hip wrapped in a jacket 2 sizes too big. The little one was asleep, head against her shoulder. The woman didn't say anything. She just stood in the doorway, dripping, looking around like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Naomi put the rag down. She didn't ask who the woman was, didn't ask where she came from, didn't ask for a name or a story. She walked over, pulled out a chair, and said, "Sit down." She went to the kitchen, came back with a warm plate, smothered chicken, rice, greens, Clyde's recipe. She set it on the table, poured a small cup of milk for the toddler, and placed it next to a folded napkin. The woman looked at the plate, then at Naomi. Her chin trembled. "I don't have any money," she whispered. Naomi sat down across from her, looked her straight in the eyes. "You don't need any. That's not what this place is for." The woman ate, slowly at first, then faster. The toddler woke up, drank the milk, and fell back asleep in the high chair Naomi pulled over. Graham came out of the kitchen, saw what was happening, and without a word made a second plate, set it on the counter in case she wanted more, then went back to the dishes. Naomi sat with the woman the whole time, didn't talk much, didn't pry, just sat there present, quiet, steady, the way someone once sat with her on a sidewalk in the rain. When the woman finished, Naomi packed a bag of food for the morning, walked her to the door, watched her disappear down the street with the toddler on her hip, the rain finally easing. She stood in the doorway for a moment, looked out at the wet street. Same neighborhood, same sky, a different life but the same heart. Then she went back inside. There was still work to do. There was always more work to do. Naomi Greer never called herself a hero. She just did what her mother taught her. You see someone hungry, you feed them. You see someone cold, you bring them in. She sat with that young woman the same way she'd once sat with her husband on a wet sidewalk in the rain, asking nothing, giving everything she had. The circle closed, quietly, the way real kindness always does. I chose to tell this story because honestly I needed to hear it myself. We live in a world that teaches you to hold on tight to what little you have, and I get that, I do. But Naomi, she reminded me of something I think a lot of us forget. Kindness doesn't wait until you can afford it. She didn't help Graham because she had enough. She helped him because she looked at another human being and couldn't walk away. No camera, no audience, no clout, just rain and a styrofoam box and a choice. And I think that kind of quiet, stubborn goodness still exists, even when the world makes it really hard to believe. Even when people judge you before they know you. Even when nobody's watching, especially when nobody's watching. If this story hit you the way it hit me, drop a like. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Like, real talk, kindness ain't about having enough, it's about seeing people. You don't gotta be rich to change a life, just gotta care when it's easier not to. And yeah, that's rare, but it's not gone. Be that person.